I'm going to respond to two comments real quick. One was in response to my video, Heaven and Its Discontents, but really it's a response to kind of an argument or thought experiment I've given a few times. The viewer says, every time someone makes this argument that God was so bored in his aloneness that he decided to create humans, I ask them, if God is so powerful that he could simply wish boredness to go away and it would go away, why didn't he do so? That means there are forces imposing God to feel bored which he cannot control by his own. Therefore, God is not that powerful. So can you really call it God? To me, this kind of objection is kind of close to that kind of can God lift a rock so heavy he can't lift it kind of nonsense, which to me I don't really take seriously, but it's not quite there. I think there is a point here that's worth responding to. So let's say, yeah, God is all powerful. He has both options. Both options are on the table. So God is alone in existence. There's nothing that exists except God because he alone is eternal. He hasn't created anything else, so it's just him, right? Nothing happens. It's just him. What can happen? There's nothing to do. There's nowhere to go. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit, but this is a human way of trying to understand it. Yeah, God is bored, so we can understand why God might be inspired to create the universe, and even enter into it in order to have experience as a way of escaping this kind of divine boredom. Now, that probably is kind of anthropomorphic, so I'll grant that, right? Maybe the mind of God isn't something we can fully understand, sure. But I'm trying the best I can to understand, the mind of God. So let's say he has both choices. So let's say he has the option of either simply willing his boredom away. Just, I feel bored because there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. It's just me. It's kind of lonely. So I will just wish. I will magic my loneliness away. I will magic my boredom away. Let's say that's an option. But let's say he also has the option of creating some kind of universe, some kind of maybe illusion, you might say, a kind of mental illusion which he can enter into and experience, what we call life. He can experience change and pleasure and pain and all the rest. Given that choice, why would he choose to simply wish his boredom away or to simply wish his loneliness away, rather than create conditions under which, he can have adventure and excitement and feel pleasure and pain and the joy of companionship and friendship and love? You see what I'm saying? The question can be turned back on the one asking it. Why would that be preferable? I mean, let me push the issue a little bit. So, if you're hungry, you're starving, let's say you have a choice between either just not having that hunger or having the most delicious, satisfying food you can ever imagine. I mean, some people might say they would choose one, some people might choose the other. I would choose to manifest some, I don't know, fried calamari with some kind of spicy marinara sauce, or you know what I mean, whatever. Let's say you're really horny. You can either just meditate and will your horniness to go away, and now you're not aroused anymore, and you're no sexual desire. Or you can bang this hot chick and just do freaky stuff with her. Which is honestly preferable? Why would God simply will away his loneliness and boredom when he could have the adventure and the excitement of creating the universe and entering into this realm of infinite experience? And the ultimate adventure of you know, becoming separated from himself and ultimately like rediscovering his true nature and, regaining his God consciousness. How exciting is that? You know what I'm saying? But let's say God doesn't have to choose. Let's say every time God is faced with a choice, he can basically create parallel universes in which he made each of those choices, right? And at the conclusion, at the end point of both universes, he's able to assess which one was preferable in retrospect and now essentially choose that one. The other one just disappears, kind of like, maybe what do they call it, like in physics, where they have like waves in a superposition state or whatever. Eventually, the wave function collapses, and then there's only one probabilistic outcome remaining, and that becomes actualized or whatever. Maybe that's basically the way like divine manifestation or whatever you want to call it works. So maybe he did create one universe in which he simply willed away his divine boredom and loneliness. And then he also created another universe where he created the universe. And in the fullness of time, in all of his wisdom, having seen what both choices have to offer, and reflecting on which is most congruent with his true will and his true nature, he chose this one. Problem solved. Like, that is it. So no, that doesn't mean that there are forces imposing God to feel bored, which he cannot control. We're only talking about his own will, his own nature. So yeah, you really can call it God. I think I've probably said enough on that. Now, this other question, to my way of thinking, is kind of closely related in the sense that in some ways it's a similar kind of question where people kind of tie themselves all up in knots over something that I really don't think is that hard to understand. This is in response to my video about do we choose our form in each incarnation? And it's kind of a free will determinism kind of question, I guess you would say. He says, if I can't be free from the burden or obligation to make a choice, then how am I truly free? I'm still under the dominion of the obligation to choose because not choosing is still a choice. I think free will is just as determined as everything else, and I would argue that having infinite choices is more oppressive and burdensome than being an absolutely determined automaton with less options under certain conditions. Just because we have some ability to rewrite and skip ahead in the universal script doesn't mean that this in itself hasn't been previously written in the script and granted to us through potentialities over the course of our evolution. What a word salad. Sometimes like people use words like to kind of build a prison for themselves. I really think we should strive as much as possible to speak as plainly as possible. The more complex our grammatical structures and all this kind of stuff get, the more we use words that are really just kind of nominalizations and all this kind of stuff, we create prisons for ourselves. And look, I mean, you can look back at some of my videos, especially like the old scripted ones, and you could say maybe I've been guilty of doing the same thing to some extent at times, but this whole thing of, oh, well, are we free if we're not free to be unfree? Yeah, I think you're kind of like creating a linguistic kind of paradox where there isn't really one in reality. You are free. It's kind of a weird question too, because it's like the person asking this, like, are you honestly saying that given a choice, you would choose to not be given a choice? To me, that's kind of contradictory. That's kind of a contradiction there, just because the only way you could choose to not be given a choice is if you had choice. You see what I'm saying? So if some people think that it's preferable to have free will and other people maybe would prefer not to have free will, then it seems to me that if you're like God or whatever, the only fair thing to do would be to give people the choice to be free or unfree. And it so you have to be free first. Because if you were just created with no free will, that wouldn't really be fair. Because then, of course, you don't have the freedom to become free or whatever, right? But at least if you're created with free will, like you can choose to exercise that free will, or maybe you can even choose to abandon it. But if you're going to choose to be unfree, having choice in the first place is prerequisite. Do you see that? That's pretty plain, I think. But then I do think that you actually kind of do have a choice to be unfree. I mean, I've said this in a few different ways before, but I actually do think that like the majority of people um, really don't have free will. I guess this is almost like a little bit of a Calvinistic kind of doctrine, like the idea of like being born in sin, so to speak, where it's like you're spiritually dead, and it's almost like it takes an outside intervention in order to like bring you to life or whatever. So it's almost by default, I think people are kind of under the grip of deterministic forces, right? Now, at some point, some impulse arises in the individual. I kind of see this as maybe some, you might call it sort of like the Holy Spirit acting upon the soul of the individual, like urging them toward freedom, toward spiritual life or something like that. But you know, you're born into a society where you know you're taught a certain culture, you have a certain set of social norms, of course your parents and your teachers and your religious institutions and your government are all kind of forcing these things on you, kind of pushing you into a particular mold, into like certain roles that you're expected to play, not really given a lot of choice, or maybe like a limited choice, sort of an illusion of choice, right? And I think it's very easy to just submit to that, allow yourself to be swept along with the current, and I think that it's only through opposition that you start to develop and strengthen your will and actually achieve something like a free will or something you might call an actual soul. I mean, the soul is there latent anyway, but I think it has to be sort of awakened. I think you're kind of like born spiritually dead, as like the Calvinist would say. Now, I'm not a Calvinist. I'm just using like kind of that Calvinist doctrine that I think a lot of people are familiar with as a way of kind of expressing something kind of similar, but also different. Um, and I mean, I think you can kind of, even after you've kind of like chosen to be your own person and have free will, I think you can kind of like lose your salvation or sort of like die or allow sin, so to speak, to basically just unconsciousness to take over and rule in you again. It's not that hard. I mean, it's like people become alcoholics, for example. Once someone is really an alcoholic, they no longer have a choice. They're going to drink. And I mean, like just 100% real. That is something that I'm kind of struggling with myself presently. So, yes, right now I'm drinking a beer. I'm not drunk, I'm not intoxicated, I'm just enjoying a beer. But it seems like over the last few years, I've kind of been falling into the group of alcoholism somewhat. So it's like I've kind of wrestled with the idea, well, do I have to like just abstain completely? I kind of don't like that idea. I like the idea of continuing to drink, but just kind of being in control and, you know, using alcohol in moderation, you know. But um, maybe at some point it has such a grip on you, like just being completely sober and just like complete abstinence. Maybe that's the only solution for some people. I haven't decided for myself yet for sure, but that's something that I'm just trying to like be self honest about, you know. But yeah, I mean, you are free, and I do think that you are basically free to be unfree, you know. I think that, you know, freedom is a choice that's offered to you, and you choose to remain free or you choose to give up your freedom. I mean, I think we see this expressed politically too. It's almost like there's this tendency for tyranny to grow, for tyranny to increase, and for individual liberties and so on, and national sovereignty maybe even to decrease. It takes a, you know, the tree of liberty is refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots or whatever, you know. I think the price of, you know, liberty is eternal vigilance and all that. And I think the same is true in the microcosm of the individual. So, I mean, if you're concerned that, you know, for you, freedom, you know, feels like a curse or something, I do believe you can give it up. And I think just the fact that you maybe have a desire to give it up is a sign that you basically already have. Because I can tell you that is not your true self. That is not your true nature speaking when you're saying you desire to be enslaved. It's not God's nature to desire to be enslaved or, you know, to become more ignorant or less powerful. I mean, the divine will is toward like greater knowledge, greater freedom. I mean, I know that because I've, you know, at least made significant progress toward becoming God, right? So, I think that's all I have to say on that one for now. I'm going to look at some other comments and think of some other things because I'm basically kind of taking a half day off today. Otherwise, like this month, I'm working nonstop. And not taking days off, sometimes I at least need a half day off. And I'm like, okay, what do I want to do with my half day off? Maybe I'll record and upload some videos. I don't feel like going to the gym right now, I just don't. So I'm probably going to just chill, record and upload some videos, maybe watch some YouTube videos, respond to some comments or whatever. So, peace.